Hollywood has always been a battleground of massive egos, where tough guys clash both on and off screen. But few actors embodied that raw, unfiltered intensity quite like Lee Marvin. The decorated Marine veteran who became one of cinema's most authentic tough guys didn't just play hard men on screen, he lived it. And when it came to his fellow actors, Marvin never held back his opinions. Before we dive into the explosive feuds and bitter rivalries that defined his career, if you're enjoying these untold stories from Hollywood's golden age, hit that like button and subscribe for more vintage Hollywood revelations. Lee Marvin wasn't born into Hollywood glamour. On February 19, 1924, he entered the world in New York City, named after Confederate General Robert E. Lee, who was actually his first cousin, 4 times removed. His father was a World War I veteran turned advertising executive, and young Lee grew up in a household steeped in military tradition. But Marvin was no model student. He was a restless soul, constantly in trouble, bouncing between schools in Florida and New Jersey. That rebellious streak would later become his trademark. But first, it would lead him down a path that would change everything. When World War II erupted, 18-year-old Marvin didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the Marine Corps and found himself thrust into the Pacific Theater's most brutal battles. In June 1944, during the Battle of Saipan, Japanese machine gun fire tore through Marvin's unit. The bullets ripped into his buttocks and sciatic nerve, nearly ending his life. He spent over a year recovering in naval hospitals, earning a Purple Heart for his sacrifice. Unlike the actors he'd later clash with who merely played soldiers, Marvin carried real scars, both physical and emotional. Those experiences gave him an edge, an authenticity that audiences could feel and that some of his co-stars would come to resent. After the war, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Working as a plumber's assistant at a community theater in Woodstock, New York, Marvin was asked to fill in when an actor fell ill. That moment sparked something in him. He moved to Greenwich Village, studied at the American Theater Wing on the GI Bill, and slowly built a reputation. By the early 1950s, he was making waves in Hollywood, but not as a leading man. Marvin was the heavy, the villain, the guy you love to hate. Films like The Big Heat in 1953 and Bad Day at Black Rock in 1955 showcased his menacing presence. For over a decade, he was Hollywood's go-to bad guy. Then came 1965, and everything changed. In the Western comedy Cat Ballou, Marvin pulled off something extraordinary, playing dual roles as both a drunken gunfighter and a vicious outlaw. Critics were stunned. Audiences were captivated. The Academy handed him the Oscar for Best Actor, and suddenly, the eternal villain was a leading man. He followed up with massive hits like The Professionals in 1966 and The Dirty Dozen in 1967, cementing his status as one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But success didn't soften Lee Marvin. If anything, it made him more outspoken about what he saw as the phoniness and ego-driven nonsense that plagued Hollywood. Now here's where things get interesting. Throughout his career, Marvin developed a reputation for being brutally honest about his fellow actors. He didn't play the Hollywood game of fake friendships and empty compliments. When he disliked someone, he said it. And the list of actors who rubbed him the wrong way reads like a who's who of Hollywood tough guys. Let's start with Burt Lancaster. During the filming of The Professionals in 1966, these two alpha males collided in spectacular fashion. Marvin was deep in the grip of alcoholism at the time, showing up to set unreliable and difficult. Lancaster, known for his professionalism and athletic discipline, had zero patience for it. Director Richard Brooks later admitted he genuinely feared Lancaster was going to, and I quote, take Lee Marvin by the rear end and throw him off that mountain. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Lancaster saw Marvin's drinking as unprofessional and disrespectful to the craft. Marvin saw Lancaster as a self-righteous prima donna. They barely spoke off camera, communicating only through the director when necessary. Then there was the infamous Dirty Dozen set in 1967, which became a powder keg of clashing egos. Charles Bronson, who played Joseph Ladislaw, nearly came to blows with Marvin during production. The incident that almost ended in violence happened when Marvin was supposed to drive an armored truck with Bronson riding shotgun. Marvin had been drinking heavily at a local pub and showed up to set completely intoxicated. When crew members finally got him sobered up enough to shoot, Bronson walked right up to him and said, "I'm gonna effing kill you, Lee." The threat wasn't idle. Bronson was furious that Marvin's behavior was jeopardizing the film and endangering the cast. Marvin, even in his drunken state, knew Bronson meant business. On that same set, Telly Savalas became another target of Marvin's ire. Marvin couldn't stand what he saw as Savalas's constant self-promotion and preening. He nicknamed Savalas a peacock in combat boots and accused him of trying to steal every scene. Savalas, who was playing the psychopathic Archer Maggot, was equally difficult, constantly demanding specific lighting and camera angles. The two men had to be kept apart between takes because the tension was affecting the entire production. Crew members later said it was like working in a war zone, which was ironic given they were making a war film. But perhaps the most surprising tensions came with actors you wouldn't expect. Take Robert Mitchum, for instance. Both men were known for their laconic style and tough guy personas. But when they worked together on Not as a Stranger in 1955, they discovered they couldn't stand each other. Marvin thought Mitchum was lazy, often showing up unprepared or hungover, which was rich, considering Marvin's own drinking problems. Mitchum, for his part, found Marvin's intensity exhausting and mocked his tendency to, as he put it, scream his lines like he's still in boot camp. Years later, at a Hollywood party, the two nearly came to blows when Marvin accused Mitchum of sleepwalking through entire films. Mitchum shot back, "At least I don't scream my lines like I'm still in boot camp." Now, here's something that might surprise you. Despite what some sources claim, Marvin actually got along well with John Wayne. They made 3 films together, including The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962 and Donovan's Reef in 1963. While Marvin privately disagreed with Wayne's conservative politics and thought his carefully cultivated war hero image was hypocritical given Wayne never served, the two men maintained a professional respect. Marvin's first wife even noted that on screen, Wayne was like a big old bear, while Marvin was more like a cobra. And somehow, that dynamic worked. Frank Sinatra was a different story entirely. When Sinatra was originally attached to the Dirty Dozen, his demands and diva behavior drove everyone crazy. He wanted special treatment, shorter hours, and expected the entire production to revolve around his schedule. Marvin, who believed in showing up and doing the work, had nothing but contempt for what he saw as Sinatra's unprofessionalism. When Sinatra eventually dropped out of the film, Marvin reportedly said, "Good riddance." He later described Sinatra as the kind of guy who thinks the world owes him applause just for walking into a room. What made Marvin's conflicts so intense was that he came from a different world than most Hollywood stars. He'd seen real combat, faced real death, and carried real wounds. When actors who'd never served tried to play tough, it insulted everything he'd been through. He particularly despised what he called the pretty boys of Hollywood, actors who relied on their looks rather than genuine talent or life experience. He had no patience for method actors who talked endlessly about motivation and character development. As he once said, "These kids only want to talk about acting method and motivation. In my day, all we talked about was the paycheck and overtime." The alcohol that fueled many of these conflicts was both Marvin's demon and his excuse. Directors often said that drinking actually improved his performances, giving him an edge and unpredictability that worked on camera. But it also made him volatile and unpredictable off camera. By the late 1970s, the drinking had taken its toll. He semi-retired after the Great Scout and Cat House Thursday in 1976, moving to Tucson, Arizona, trying to escape the Hollywood machine that had made him famous but never made him happy. When he did return for films like The Big Red One in 1980, directed by his friend Samuel Fuller, it was different. The fire was still there, but it was controlled, focused. Fuller later said that Marvin's character was the carpenter of death. The sergeants of this world have been dealing death to young men for 10,000 years. It was a role that required the kind of authenticity only Marvin could bring. Even in his final film, The Delta Force in 1986, starring opposite Chuck Norris, Marvin brought a gravitas that younger action stars couldn't match. The irony of Lee Marvin's career is that the very qualities that made him difficult, his refusal to play Hollywood games, his brutal honesty, his authentic toughness, were exactly what made him a star. He didn't pretend to be anything other than what he was. A wounded warrior who found a second life in pretending to be tough on screen, even though he didn't have to pretend. The actors he clashed with often represented everything he felt was wrong with Hollywood. The phoniness, the ego, the pretense. His personal life reflected these same contradictions. Married to Betty Ebling for 15 years, they had 4 children together. But the marriage couldn't survive Marvin's drinking and his affairs. Betty later claimed he'd been unfaithful with actress Anne Bancroft, among others. His subsequent relationship with Michelle Triola ended in one of the most famous palimony cases in legal history. Only with his third wife, Pamela Feely, his childhood sweetheart, whom he remarried in 1970, did he find some measure of peace. By the 1980s, years of hard living had caught up with him. A heavy smoker and drinker, Marvin's health was failing. In December 1986, he was hospitalized with complications from valley fever. The treatment led to intestinal ruptures and emergency surgery. 8 months later, on August 29, 1987, Lee Marvin's heart finally gave out. He was 63 years old. They buried him with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where he belonged, among the real warriors. Looking back, Lee Marvin's feuds and conflicts weren't really about the individuals. They were about authenticity versus artifice, substance versus style, truth versus pretense. In a town built on illusion, Marvin insisted on being real, even when, especially when it made him enemies. He once said, "I've played more heroes than villains, but the villains were more interesting." The same could be said about his off-screen persona. Lee Marvin might not have been the easiest man to work with, but in an industry full of fake tough guys, he was the real deal. And that authenticity, that refusal to compromise, that's what made him a legend. If you enjoyed these untold stories from vintage Hollywood, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Comment below with which classic Hollywood feud you'd like to hear about next. Until next time, this is your window into the golden age of cinema, where the drama behind the scenes was often more explosive than anything on screen.